Brent Ridge, thank you for joining me.
Oh, it's great to be here, Bora. You're my LinkedIn friend.
For the first time we're meeting, I'm so happy that we finally got a chance to do this. So, Brent, you have a book out, Goat Wisdom, and I'd love to kind of go through that as well. But before we get into that, you probably already told the story a million times, but very interesting. Of course, I learned all about that in the book. The story with the farm and the financial crisis days, and some goats and the amazing race, and there's just like a lot of interesting things. If you could do like a quick summary of, if you could kind of like flashback and just like bring back everybody kind of up to speed, and then we can get into business after going through that.
Of course, yeah. Well, my background is in longevity medicine, and I was living and working in New York City. I was at Mount Sinai Hospital. That's where I met my husband and future business partner, Josh Kilmer Purcell. And I had been on faculty at Mount Sinai Hospital, went back to business school at NYU, and then took a job at Martha Stewart's company to create a new division devoted to health and wellness. And I was working at that job in 2006. My husband was in advertising, he was a partner at an agency. And in 2006, we decided that we would buy this weekend getaway in upstate New York because if you can recall back to that time period, the economy was amazing. They were handing out these 0% mortgages basically on every street corner. And so many of our friends in the city were buying these weekend places in the Hamptons or somewhere upstate. And so obnoxiously, we decided we needed to buy a place in upstate New York. So we were driving around in this little town called Sharon Springs, about 3.5 hours outside the city. Saw this beautiful old farmhouse built in the year 1802 by a man named William Beekman, and we decided to buy it. Now, shortly after we bought it, we were only coming up on maybe 1 or 2 weekends a month. We had a note in our mailbox from a local farmer who was losing his farm, and he said, "I have a herd of 100 goats and I'm losing my farm property. Could I please bring them to your property to graze? Otherwise, I'll have to sell my herd." And so we met with him and saw how much he loved these animals. And we said, sure, completely fine. Bring them. There was another little cottage on the property. We said, you can live there. The animals can use the barn. And it actually worked out great for us because when we're not there, which was most of the time, you can keep an eye on things for us. And we say that was the original act of kindness that started Beekman 1802, because 2 years later, when the recession hit, because of all those 0% mortgages that were handed out, we both lost our jobs. My division of Martha folded, my husband's advertising agency folded, and we had one of those kind of classic oh crap moments where we had this huge mortgage on this farm. We're like, what are we going to do? And we were very depressed for about 6 months, I would say. We spent a lot of time out in the barn just staring at goats. And then one day we said, okay, what are our true assets? We're both creative. I'm a scientist. He's a great marketer. And we have goats. What can we make with goat milk? And
Mhm.
so we Googled what can we make with goat milk, and goat milk soap popped up. And so we worked with a neighbor in our little community of Sharon Springs, started making bars of goat milk soap around our dining room table, originally selling them on our website. Now, this was 16 years ago. And now 60 million bars of soap later. That's how
Wow.
Beekman 1802 started.
What a story. I mean, it's just amazing. What can we do with goat
Yeah.
goat milk? It's just that Googling it, and then here we are. Beekman 1802, incredible brand. So uh, okay, let's talk about the Amazing Grace stuff too.
Yeah. Well, we had, shortly after we started the business, back then, 16 years ago, no one was making a fortune on e-commerce. Like that was the early days of e-com. And so we quickly learned we were not going to pay off $1 million mortgage anytime really quickly through our website sales. And so Josh started going back into the city to try to interview for jobs as the economy started to pick up again. And he went into for a job posting at Discovery Networks. They were starting a new channel called Planet Green, and he was interviewing for the chief marketing officer at that channel. And in the process of that interview, he told the person conducting the interview about our situation and about how we had decamped to this farm and we're starting this company. And the person doing the interview said, "You know what? You're not the right candidate for the chief marketing officer of this network. However, your story is so fascinating because there were so many people, mid-career professionals, who were starting over at the time. Um, she said, we would love to make a docu-series about your life on the farm and what you and your husband are trying to do on the farm." So that became a show called The Fabulous Beekman Boys, which aired for 2 seasons, a docu-series that really just followed our life on the farm and the beginnings of Beekman 1802. And one of the early fans of that show was one of the producers from CBS of The Amazing Race. And the way we got on her radar was that we had written a cookbook based on the recipes we were creating on the farm and from our blog. And we were in Santa Monica at the Santa Monica Public Library doing a cookbook signing. And at the end of the line was this little lady. She probably was in her 60s or 70s, very unassuming. She had her oxygen tank with her. You know, she was like, "Oh, I love watching your show." She every day, my next door neighbor comes over and we watch your show together. Uh, and we said, "Oh, that's so sweet," because in our head we were like, "Oh, these two older ladies, you know, getting together and watching our little show." And then she threw in, and she's the president of CBS Reality TV. And I said, "Oh, well, if she's such a big fan of our show, why aren't we on The Amazing Race?" I was just being flippant. Like I didn't believe that this person knew the president of CBS Reality TV. And she said, "I'm going to tell her." And then 2 weeks later, we were at the farm. The phone rang. I picked it up, and someone said, "Hi, we're calling from The Amazing Race. We heard you wanted to run." And that's how we originally got into the casting process for The Amazing Race. And to be honest, Bora, we were kind of hesitant to do it because we had had experience on reality TV at that point, and you know, we don't consider ourselves to be particularly compelling reality TV people. And but we said, you know what? Maybe this is the business opportunity that we need. We said, okay, the 11 million people watch The Amazing Race at that time every year, and if we can just run it and make it to the halfway point, we will have maximized the potential exposure for Beekman 1802, right? Because no one's going to start watching The Amazing Race more than halfway in. And so we said, let's do it. And all we have to do is hold on to the halfway point. And we did it. We held on to the halfway point, and then we just couldn't lose. We just kept running until we won it. And winning that $1 million prize was ultimately paid off the mortgage on our farm and helped us really kickstart Beekman 1802 for real.
That's so incredible because it's, you know, even right now, sometimes I feel like this is a great idea, but if I don't have a really solid distribution channel, it's not worth pursuing because, like, how am I going to reach people? It's almost like if I can get into something like Amazing Race, then start the business. Otherwise, don't even bother with it, kind of a thing.
Right. Well, I mean, honestly, you know, back then, so this was now what, 12 years ago. So social media was not what it is now. And you can, if you have the right content and the right viral moment, you can get as much exposure on a TikTok post as we got on The Amazing Race. It's a different world now than it was then. But you're absolutely right. When you look at all the businesses that have been on Shark Tank and have turned, you know, ideas into amazing businesses based on that exposure, yeah, getting that attention is critical.
Yeah. So, Brent, when people hear the Beekman 1802 story, like you just told us now, they usually focus on the big pivot, right? The leaving the successful New York careers, moving to a farm, starting a business during the recession. So these things kind of resonate and inspiring. Also, kind of if people are kind of going through some tough times themselves, it
Mm-hmm.
kind of helps them be motivated, right? But when you look back to those days, and it's been as you said, 16 years now. What do you think actually mattered most building a resilient brand, like during this whole time?
The thing that mattered most for us in particular is that we we're always thinking about building a brand that would last beyond us. And I can tell you about how we thought about that. So we were never looking for a quick exit, which I think over the past decade, the business cycle has really rewarded people who are just trying to build for a quick exit. Um, and I think that really helped us set down a great foundation for the business. As we talk about in the book, we always wanted to create a greatest of all time business. And that's a different type of business. Like you can have a very good business, that's profitable. You can have a great business that is, making lots of money for you and maybe even generational wealth for you. But a greatest of all time business is something beyond that. That
Mhm.
is something that you know means something to people, and it's an important part of their life, and it's going to outlive you. The legacy of which will outlive you, and that's always what we thought about building greatest of all time business. And community has always been so important to us. Going back to Farmer John, who by the way is still on the farm with the goats, and our little community of Sharon Springs, New York, that this idea of neighbors has always been very important to us. And we always say, even to this day, we grew our company neighbor by neighbor by neighbor, and we call all of our customers neighbors, and they call themselves neighbors. And it's just a very specific thing about how we have always thought about building the company.
Hmm. So interesting. Just the way the company got started through difficulties, and I feel like it's kind of reminiscent of. I mean, I feel like that's very similar to what's happening these days, where a lot of people are kind of losing their jobs because of AI, and they are forced to become entrepreneurs. Like, and
Yep,
nobody else is hiring. Everybody's kind of laying off. So it's kind of like constraints kind of force people to become creative, right? And the
that's right.
constraint is that there's no other choice, but I have to do this. And then you kind of, and then the Amazing Race happened, and some money came through that, and some distribution came. But then the rest of it, as you just explained, is very intentional, right? Your book keeps coming back to ideas like kindness and
Hmm.
relationships and community, just like you just mentioned that, like you call your customers neighbors, not consumers. And then not these are not growth tactics, right? Because you can't really measure them on a spreadsheet. But I feel like I don't really see a lot of brands or even startups kind of thinking about these things because they feel like intangible. Like, so why do you think so many founders underestimate those things?
I think because a lot of times founders need to have quicker success. I think particularly these days, people need, the cycles are so fast. People think that they need to prove themselves very, very quickly or take investment very, very quickly in order to scale. We call that the Shark Tankification of entrepreneurship. Shark Tank has kind of encouraged a whole generation of entrepreneurs that the only way that you can be successful is to have an idea and get someone else's money to support the idea. Um, but we always said from the beginning we wouldn't spend a dollar until we had made $1.50. We always had just a very old fashioned approach to how we were building a company, and I think people don't realize how long it actually takes to build a brand, like a true brand. Like a lot of people think, oh, I have a product or maybe even a collection of products, and maybe even they're successful and they look great on social media and they're selling a lot of them. But a collection of product doesn't make a brand. The value of a brand is that it's a signal of trust. And that's just not something that develops in 6 months or from a viral post or even a year or maybe even 6 years. To build trust with the consumer takes a long time. But then when you have built that trust, then you are really rewarded. And that's why like good, strong brands live for such a long time, because you have built that trust and you're rewarded for it.
Mhm. Well, there's a lot to learn here, not just for founders of e-commerce brands, but even like founders of tech companies right now. So, like when, for instance, I mean, I'm a founder of a tech company, and so this is something that we struggle very much with right now, where anybody can build anything with AI. It's just very hard
Mhm.
to stand out. So, technology is not your differentiator. So everybody kind of talks about there's two, three things that are the differentiators. One of them is distribution, if you can get it. The other is taste, if you have it. And the third one is brand, right? So like what a lot of people just don't know what that is, right? So and then as you just described, you don't get it like in a few months or a year or even 6 years sometimes. And then how can you differentiate a new company through brand at the start, right? So, and then you kind of have to make some intentional choices, I guess. Like, let's talk about maybe kindness in this case, right? So, every time I see you talk about something, it's kindness is always there. Every time
Yeah,
I look at Beekman related things, kindness is always there. So, I'm just like, over time, it's kind of embedded in my brain, you
that's
know,
right. That's
Beekman,
right.
kindness, Beekman, kindness. So you made it a real part of the brand and not just a slogan. And
That's
then
right. And
so
it
yeah.
and it goes through every aspect of our company. In we say that original act of kindness, Farmer John coming. That's the DNA of our company, and it runs throughout every part of our company. Every employee who joins the company goes through a kindness curriculum so that they understand the science of kindness, why kindness is wellness, why how kindness impacts your body on a cellular level. Like everybody understands that who joins our company, and we often say that we're not a skin care company. We are a company that promotes kindness. And we say, yes, we can put more kindness out into the world because if someone is using our product every morning when they wake up, or they use it the last thing that they interact with before they go to bed, and they see that product and they are reminded about the importance and the power of kindness during that ritual of self care, that's a very powerful moment. And when they feel that kindness, then they will therefore put more kindness out into the world. And that is our mission, how to put more kindness out into the world. And even if you look at our like affiliate program on social media, it's called the Kindness Crew. It's about 3,000 people now. And yes, just like any affiliate program, they are financially rewarded when they put a link and someone clicks on their link and they make a sale. But we also reward them when we see them performing acts of kindness or posting content that is not about product, but is about putting kindness out into the world. They get incentivized by free product or being able to participate in certain campaigns, because the idea is not just how are we selling product, but how are we putting more kindness out into the world. And
Mhm.
thinking about that on every single aspect of how the brand develops is so critical. And it's so pleasing to hear you say, when I think of Beekman, I think of kindness, or when I think of kindness, I think of Beekman, because that means that we are doing our job correctly. But I'll go back to something you were saying, particularly interesting for someone in a tech or SaaS related field or AI type field. I think you're doing the exact right thing in terms of brand building, because so many times SaaS or AI in particular seems very anonymous. And so it's really hard to build trust. But by virtue of the fact that you are a very common presence on LinkedIn, the fact that you're doing these podcasts and building your personal brand puts a face behind the product. And if you look at ChatGPT, the reason ChatGPT is by far much more visible to the common consumer than Claude or Anthropic is because Sam Altman is so good about building the personal brand of Sam Altman. And so consumers then trust ChatGPT and experiment more with ChatGPT than they have with Claude or Anthropic, even though they're all really great, LLMs. Um, you know, Sam has mastered this idea of how to build a personal brand, and that's how you build trust.
Yeah, times have changed. I in my previous startup, I was the behind the scenes guy. Nobody even knew that I was even involved, especially when you come
Yeah,
from tech or like coding or programming kind of backgrounds. You just don't want to be like at the forefront. But these days, you have to be kind of,
it,
there's no
it,
other way to kind of connect with people for the reasons that you
that's
described.
right. That's
So
right.
you were earlier talking about Shark Tankification and just coming up with an idea and getting the money, and you think that it's just going to be successful. But you know, like also in your book, you talk a lot about staying scrappy. So,
Hmm.
do you think having too much capital too early can actually make a company worse?
Oh, I absolutely do. I think taking investment. Here's the thing. I think if you're in a tech company and you have a proprietary system that you're developing, a particular idea that you're developing, I think having money super early is really important because if you've come up with an idea, guaranteed that someone is just right behind you with a very similar idea. And so that first mover advantage in tech, I think, is really important. But in consumer product goods and in most other businesses, I think that first mover advantage is not as important. Um, and I think it's much more important to lay the foundation of a good business and a good brand before you take any outside investment. Because once you take that outside investment, two things happen. One, you're more flush with cash, and so then you're less conscientious about how you're spending your cash. And then two, you're starting a clock on when you have to reward the people who have invested in you. And that clock is usually 3, 5, maybe 8 years before they're going to want a return on their investment. And when you've got that type of clock ticking, you are going to make decisions that are sometimes irrational or sometimes not at the right time of the company, just because you're trying to honor these people who have taken a risk on you. And that just, for a lot of entrepreneurs, that is a death spiral.
Hmm. So product versus brand again. So you and Josh both came in with strong storytelling instincts from media. So
Mhm.
how much of the brand's growth you think came from understanding how to tell the story and not just make the product?
Oh, I think storytelling is very important because people don't remember a product, they don't remember features and benefits, but they'll remember a story because that's how the human brain is wired to remember things. We have evolved, our brains evolved to remember information via story. And so we always tell all of our marketing team and whatnot, when we come up with a new product, what is the story behind the product? What is going to make that product memorable from a consumer standpoint? So I think it's really, really critical. And early on, again, 16 years ago when we started, Facebook was the only real social media platform. And even then, it was still really in the realm of like looking up your old high school classmates or college classmates. Like business really wasn't even on Facebook when we first started. I think we were probably, if not the very first farm on Facebook. And we always said that we would do 5 parts telling and 1 part selling. So what we meant by that was that we would post a recipe or we would post a nice picture of the farm or show something with the goats or say something about one of the neighbors in Sharon Springs. We would tell 5 stories for every post that we did about a product with a link to buy a product. And I think to a large degree, we still try to hold to that today as well. Like on our social media posts, you'll see if you go to our personal pages, we very rarely will post a link to a product. We're always trying to tell the story because at the end of the day, the story is the thing that has the most value. Products will come and go, trends on products will come and go, innovations will come and go, but the story is the thing that is invaluable and will last forever.
Mhm. So you've done incredibly well on platforms like QVC and HSN. What do great life sellers understand about consumer psychology that most brands are missing?
I think it's about, it goes back to trust and building connection. And if you think about those platforms, TV retail, which, were the pioneers in live selling, and those TV hosts were the original influencers, because they were, for 40 years, they've been selling millions and millions and millions of dollars of product a day. And it really all comes down to the two things we've already talked about. Storytelling. Can you tell a story about why you created the product, who that product is for, why that product is going to change their life? And repetition is really key because the repetition of the story, showing up, telling that story, making that personal connection with the customer, that's what builds trust. And that, again, trust is what gets rewarded.
So it kind of TikTok shop or live commerce right now seem to have some overlaps with this probably, right? So what are a few things you think people can borrow from that playbook?
I think if you are, I think the reason that content creators now are so successful at launching their own brands is because one, they've spent a lot of time in front of their audiences, right? And that repetition has built trust. They've let people into whatever bits of their personal life that they felt comfortable sharing, which again builds that trust. And I think the most successful live sellers are people who are going to be able to understand what bits of their personal life they need to reveal to build that trust with the consumer. Of course, you need to have the skills of understanding purchasing psychology. So you need to understand, well, when is a limited offer powerful? You know, what is that psychology, or what's the psychology of a hook? You know, a particular marketing hook. Yes, you need to know all of those things. Some people just know that stuff innately, like they just sense it and they can do it innately. But you can learn all those things. But the storytelling aspect of it and letting people understand the person who is selling, that's what they're buying. They're buying that person and their taste or their story as much as they're buying the product. Hopefully the product lives up to what they're saying, but they're buying a piece of that person every time they make a purchase.
Mhm. Brent, you write about the danger of the gap between perception and reality. Um, One thing I want to ask you is like, has that ever happened to you where the outside story looked great, but internally you knew something was off? And if something like that happens to a founder, they realize that there's a gap like that, what should they fix first, the actual business or the way they're telling the story?
You know what? I think for us, when we first started the company, I had come from Martha Stewart, which is one of the most perfect worlds ever created, right? I mean, she was the original kind of, you know, multi hyphenate brand builder. And the world that she created was perfection. Just like you think Beekman 1802 kindness, people think perfect Martha Stewart, you know. And so when we first started the company and our life on Beekman Farm, we were trying to create that perfect world. And we soon realized that one, that's really hard to do if you don't have a company of 800 people helping you create perfection. But also, we remember one crystal clear day. We had been trying to create this beautiful world on our website and our social media, and then one day, one winter, we showed a picture on Facebook of our pantry at the farm, and it was a mess, like most people's pantries are. You know, like half open jars and packages and bag of dog food, whatever. You know, it's just a mess. And we're like, okay, today we're going to focus on cleaning our pantry. And the response to that reveal of real life turned out to be very, very powerful to people. It was, for the early years of our company, it by far was our most successful post ever on Facebook. And it was because people want to see the real life. You know, there are places when you want to have a perfectly curated image and show perfection, but people truly want that authenticity in that real life because they want to know that you are just like them. If they are trusting your judgment on something, they want to know that you are living the same life that they live. And so that lesson of learning about showing real life, I think, was really critical for us early on in the company. And it's how we have grown the company even to this day. Yes, I mean, we're a 16-year-old company, so there are going to be peaks and valleys in any company. And I think a lot of times, people have this, entrepreneurs in particular have this thing, fake it until you make it. And so you're always trying to show yourselves to be more successful than maybe you are. But for us, we have always said, when we have a failure, we are transparent about the failure. And we want people to learn along with us. And that's one of the reasons that we wrote the book, Go Wisdom, because we wanted people to see, like, if you were just looking at the brand from the outside, you might think, oh, wow, this has been this amazing, easy story. And it just went from one success to the next success. Well, that's not the case. That's never the case. And there's so much to learn from failures and seeing other people's failures and from honesty. Yeah, we just try to be really honest and transparent.
Mm-hmm. Brent, you talk about protecting the golden goose, the
Mm-hmm.
thing that really makes the business work. What was that golden goose for Beekman 1802?
For Beekman 1802, the golden goose is that idea of kindness, and how can we put more kindness out into the world, and that will always be the case. And it's so interesting with kindness. So when we started the company, we were kind of leveraging the history of William Beekman, and I know you'll appreciate this as someone who loves brand. And so our original store in Sharon Springs was called the Beekman Mercantile, because the source of William Beekman's wealth was that he was the original mercantilist in Sharon Springs, New York. And his mercantile and the farm was right at the end of what was called the Lunenburg Turnpike, which was the last mapped road out of the Northeast. So in 1802, this was before the Louisiana Purchase. So, this was right when wagon trains were starting to, head out west. People would stop at his mercantile to pick up provisions as they were, heading out west. It was like one of the last places to stock up on things. And that was the source of his wealth. And so the original company was based around this idea of, we're going to sell everything that is that William Beekman would have sold in his mercantile. And we actually have a postcard from the 1860s from the original Beekman mercantile that listed all the things that you could buy there. And it was apothecary, and it was food supplies, and it was hardware, and it was everything. And so our original company had different verticals, and we were selling product and designing product in home decor, gardening, food products, and beauty, skincare and beauty. Skincare and beauty was always the biggest part of the company, but we always had these other verticals. And we got to a point where the beauty vertical was just far eclipsing everything else. So we decided, okay, we're going to just focus on the beauty and the skincare portion of the company. And so at that point, we hired an outside agency to come in to tell us, what is our brand truly about? Because at this point in time, we had not said, oh, Beekman is about kindness. The kindness was there. We were already calling our customers neighbors. This idea of community was really embedded into what we were doing. And after the agency spent about a week with us, they were on the farm with us, they were at our offices, they were meeting with all of our team. It was the founder of that agency who said, oh, you're not a beauty or skincare company. You are a kindness company. And that was a eureka moment for us, because we had had a hard time going from this company that was multi-platform, multi-siloed, into one crystallized moment of who we are. And that outside perspective was so important to us, because, as Josh always likes to say, you can't see really where you are when you're standing at the top of the mountain. You need the perspective of someone standing away from the mountain to see where you are and tell you where you are. And when he said that, you are a company about kindness, that was the light bulb moment for us. And we're like, yes, that is the one word that sums up Beekman 1802. And that's he nailed it.
And what year was this?
This was 2014. So we were 6 years into the company.
The kindness came. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
So, I mean, let's tie that in with another thing that you said. You said every business is really in the hospitality business, right?
Yeah.
Actually, I have a book, one of the books behind me. I I need to start. It's called like Extreme Hospitality or something
Oh,
like that.
Will Guidara, he's amazing. Yeah,
Yeah, so I
yeah,
want to I wanna read that
yeah.
one. But so like you even talked about personally calling customers, and
Mhm.
what do you mean by that? Like everybody's in the hospitality business. Like, am I in the hospitality business? As a
You are. You absolutely are. And I even felt this even before we started Beekman when I was a practicing physician. I always felt that my patients, I was in the hospitality business and I was trying to create a better life for my patients. And I think no matter, we say in the book, no matter what business you are in the business of being hospitable because your customer can go to anybody. At Mount Sinai, there were dozens of other physicians that people could choose other than me. And so you really do have to be hospitable no matter what business that you are in. And that book by Will is incredible, and I can't wait for you to read it. And Yeah, I think you just have to think about that. Like when you go to a great hotel or a great restaurant, it's not necessarily the one thing that like the dish that you tried or the pool experience or whatever. It's the whole feeling that you get. And that's what I mean by hospitable. What feeling does the brand or the interaction create for you? Because that's the thing that the consumer is going to remember, that feeling. And so that's what we encourage, everybody to try to create in their business. What feeling are you going to create? You're going to generate for that consumer.
Mhm. I think this is just so relevant for so many people right now, who are either starting something new, having forced to start something new, or having to pivot their companies that no longer work because of certain things into something completely new. So it's just, I think, a time right now, like April of 2026, is just like a new thing has to start. The thing
Mm-hmm.
of yesterday or last year are just no longer relevant, and if I keep doing that, it's just gonna die.
You are right
So,
about that. You are right about that. Things do, come in cycles like this where there are resets for large numbers of people. And that's one of the reasons that we decided to write Goat Wisdom, which stands for Greatest of All Time Wisdom. Um, because even though cycles change, the foundations of how to build something great have never changed. And if you stick to the tried and true principles, you will create something great. And it takes patience. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of grit. But you already have everything that you need, every bit of advice. You've heard it all before, but you've maybe not applied it in the right way. And so that's really what we wanted to do with Go Wisdom, because so much, as you know, Bora, on social media, it's always 5 easy steps to do this, or take this course and you're going to accomplish this, or here's a hack for doing XYZ. And those things can be temporarily successful, but they're not usually long-term successful tips. And so we wanted to write a book that was like really foundational. Whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're an entrepreneur working in a big corporation, you're over your team, what are the foundational ideas that that you've heard, but maybe have not taken into account, or maybe you lost sight of, or maybe didn't incorporate as well as you should. And we wanted to remind people of that. And that's why it was so important for us to partner with Harvard Business to write the book, because we wanted people to understand that there was that stamp of credibility from the best business school in the world to say, you know what? Yes, the foundational guidance for any business is right here. And it's not the new trick, it's not the latest psychology, it's these foundational principles. They were important 100 years ago and they're important now. And so we hope the book, when people read through the book, they are reminded of that.
so the wisdom. So very interesting, right? The difference between knowledge and wisdom. So like it
Mm.
seems like knowledge has become very cheap right now, but
You
wisdom
know,
is
not
not the
not
same as
not
knowledge.
or not information.
Or
Information has
yeah,
become cheap. Yeah.
information. Yes.
And what and oh, yeah, we're bombarded with information, and with AI, more and more information.
Hmm.
And information is not the same as wisdom. Information is something that is usually comes in, maybe you notice it, and then it goes away, and then you forget it. And how you get from information to wisdom. And information is very important. Information times application times time is what gives you wisdom. And so what we want people to
Oh, that's
do,
interesting. That's a formula. I was
yeah,
like,
that's the
because I was like,
formula.
how do you explain the difference? So you have a formula:
They'll
information
have a
times
formula. And
application
so
times
as
time.
as you're on social media, maybe you're looking at a LinkedIn post and you see, Bora, or you see Gary V or Scott Galloway, whoever you watch, and you're like, oh, that's a good bit of information. How often have you done this, Bora? Someone has said something so smart, you're like, oh, that's really good. I'm going to remember that. By the end of the day, you don't remember it, right? Because you've already been bombarded with 1,000 other pieces of information between that point. And so what people need to do is they need to, when they hear a good bit of information like that, the first thing is like, oh, I'm going to remember this for later. No, you need to take that bit of information, think, okay, why did that capture my attention? There must be some problem I'm trying to solve that made that relevant to my brain at this moment. Make that connection right then and apply it right then to that problem. And that's how you can convert that information into the wisdom that makes the difference in your business. It needs to be an immediate connection. And your brain is already making that connection. If you, of all the pieces of wisdom or information that you are bombarded with in the course of a day, if something stood out to you, that's because your brain is already saying that was important. You just
Mhm.
need to match up why your brain was telling you that was important. And the sooner that you can do that, if you can do it immediately, that's when it's going to have the most impact for you. And then,
Mhm.
the reason wisdom sticks around for so long, and the reason like each chapter in the book is this, ancient proverbial wisdom, is because it has to be replicatable, right? And this comes, back from the scientific method, right? You can discover anything once, and it could be a random discovery, but can you replicate that discovery? And that's so important. And that's why wisdom sticks around, because so many people have used it over so many lengths of time and have shown that yes, you can replicate this thing, this outcome, and that's how you get to the wisdom. So yeah.
Yeah. So again, this is all tied in with the other thing you mentioned is explaining wisdom while you were writing the book. And this ties in with, again, brand and with taste. I'm trying to be a good student of how do I get taste? How do I get creativity?
Mm,
How do I do things that are intentional? When I was studying this, realized, all right, to get taste, you have to study the greats that have stood the test of time, right? Not like if you think about information that's kind of like constantly, that hasn't stood the test of time yet. It's just very new.
right.
But if you look at the great books or great music or great art or great architecture or great design or great fashion, like I bought all these like, these expensive Taschen books, like everything is like
Yeah. Oh, yes.
$55 and higher. But
Yeah.
if you actually study those, like the history of art and the greats, it kind of helps you develop a little bit of this, like what can stand the test of time, and
That's right.
how do you tie this in with developing tastes potentially, and how do you kind of tie it in with maybe timeless wisdom. It's not very easy to do, but it feels like a lot of effort has to be made to achieve this.
It doesn't. Actually, it's interesting because I do think that AI can help you there, because the most important thing with development of taste is having an understanding of history and understanding the pattern of why something became or why it is important. And I think actually LLMs are very good at finding the reason why something is important and understanding pattern, right? That's what they're built off of, is understanding pattern. But I think taste comes from educating yourself, understanding the importance of history, and recognizing patterns, and why that pattern is important or why that trend is becoming important, and understanding the why behind it. We talk a little bit in the book about, we applied it to something else, but I think it goes here too. The five whys, like five whys deep. Whys, not WISE, but WHYS. Um, Anytime someone says something, they state something as a fact, always ask why. And then when they answer your question, ask why again to that answer. And then when they answer that why, ask again. And then like by the fifth why, by the time they've answered the fifth why, then you're probably down to the granular of truth to why that they made that statement. And that degree of inquisitiveness and curiosity is so important to get down to that fifth why, because otherwise you're just kind of superficial. And that's how you're going to really get down to the truth.
Brent, let's nerd out a little bit. We're done with the book and the business lessons, but since you're in longevity and, I think a lot about this, like this is something I haven't thought about before. And I kind of read books about it, like, how to not die or something like books about like low protein and, how do people live long and then can AI help accelerate the longevity research? Somebody is saying, hey, like if you figure out not to die in the next 5 years, like you won't die because in the next 5 years the technology will get to a point where our cells will start kind of going back or reversing aging or something like that. You're researching this, what are you learning right now? What are you working on?
Okay, this is so critical, Bora, and I wish everybody would hear this and apply it. When I was first starting my career, I had received this fellowship from the American Federation of Aging Research. I was at Harvard. We were working on this study called the New England Centenarian Study. And what this study was doing was it was looking at generations in families that had all lived to 100. So there were multiple generations dating back into the 1800s where people had lived to 100 in the same family. And so we were identifying these families. We were using the Mormon database because they have such amazing genealogy databases in the Mormon church. Identifying these families and then doing exhaustive interviews with these families, looking at their behaviors, and then also doing blood tests on these family members to see if we could find one bit of DNA that was consistent in these families where we could say, aha, that is what it contributes to longevity, this little snippet of DNA. And so the research went on and on for years and years. And you know what they finally discovered was that it's not, this happened long after I left the project. There was no genetic marker that said, oh, this is what's going to make you live longer. The two most important things to longevity are your optimism, the fact that you believe in your mind that you can overcome the stresses of everyday life and just hang in there. So optimism is important.
Wow.
And social connection is important. The people that you surround yourself with and the bonds that you make with those people. And then if to come full circle, and the reason at Beekman kindness is so important to us is, yes, it's part of our DNA, but as someone who has spent my whole life looking at longevity and, so curious about inflammation in the body and, cellular markers and these things, which are all interesting and very intriguing things to study. Kindness is wellness. Because if you think about self-kindness and how you're optimistic, when you look in the mirror and you're like, you know what, Bora, you're telling yourself in the mirror, I know I'm going to accomplish what I set out to accomplish today. So often people look in the mirror and they're negative the very first thing they say in the mirror. So self-kindness is really important because that changes your entire cellular makeup because it's altering the neurohormones in your body. And then kindness also helps you build those social connections, right? The way you treat other people, when you treat other people with empathy, that helps you build those social connections. So those two things, the optimism and the social connections, the only two things so far, of all the things that have been researched about longevity, the only two things that have been shown to actually contribute to longevity, both are rooted in kindness, both self-kindness and kindness in how you treat others. And that's why I say kindness is the essential ingredient in Beekman, even more important than goat milk.
Wow. That I did not expect you to say all these things, but it's incredible. Hey, I like that because it seems fairly easy to implement. Just all these mental, psychological things.
It is. Well, it's not easy, as we
Yeah.
know, it's not easy, but with effort, anybody can accomplish it. It's not like you need a secret trick. You just need
Mhm.
to have the focus.
Brent, my last question: what are the priorities for you personally, and also as a company for the rest of the year that you're excited about?
Well, I would say professionally, just continuing to put more kindness out into the world. We have no doubt that we have built a legacy company that will outlive us. So my personal goal now is just how much kindness can I continue to put out into the world? And, it starts by having conversations just like this, right? And for people who are going to, happen across this interview. Um, so that from a business standpoint, we're focused on longevity now and how we're using the nutrients from goat milk to make the microbiome healthier on the skin, and how we're using exosomes that we take from the goat milk to deliver ingredients into the skin. And then how we are encouraging people that skin health is an entire ecosystem. And I think for so long, people have looked at problem solution in a very finite way. And we've gotten away from looking at things holistically and as ecosystems. And what happens on the surface of our skin is impacting everything else in our body. And what's happening in our body is impacting the surface of our skin. And what's happening in our mind is impacting the health of our body and the surface of our skin. And so we're just trying to figure out how to help people understand that their skin health is an entire ecosystem. And this requires a lot of education because people have gotten so far away from thinking in that holistic manner. And so we're just really out there trying to teach people.
Everything is connected.
Everything is connected.
Brent Ridge, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Bora.